got your games group together. They've all assembled or sitting ready to go. Coming a little bit later than the others, and is rapidly working to catch up to be ready to go when we start. Across from me is Charlie. Charlie's got just a ton of homework that he's had to work on all week, and now he's having to put that aside to do the fun of playing a game, and so he's a little distracted. Over here is David, and I'm never going to remember these names, by the way. So just realize that I'm probably going to run into problems. David over here has got his character sheet out as well, but he uses his phone and does most of the work on the phone because it's far easier for him than a paper document. Not that it matters because they're all, after all, just characters. And beside him is Evan, and Evan is a little nervous because he brought his lady friend with him, and this is her first time playing. So we will be dealing with a lot of interesting questions with the new player, especially since she's the only female at the table. But we will get back to that when that happens. Hi, I'm Jonathan Albin, and this is NycosRPG, and we are talking about the problem children. And what I mean when I speak of problem children is not the players that you would want to get rid of. They're not players who are breaking the game. They aren't players who are manipulating others. There's no bullying going on. There's no difficulties. It's just that these are challenges that I've seen in my 50 years as a game master, and I want to help you to overcome them as we go through them. So I'm going to be relating basically this adventure night and integrating each of the personas in order for you to understand how these problems are represented and how to resolve them. So as we start our session, all 6 players got their numbers together. They're eagerly leaning forward in their seats, wanting to find out where we're headed. And today we're on a coastline, and we've come across a wrecked vessel. It's sitting in the shallows, tilted on somewhat to the leeward side. It's manageable to walk on the decks, but it is somewhat a kilter. As the adventurers climb onto the wreck, they determine that it's best not to separate the party, which of course is always wise advice, but they decide they want to cover the most territory possible, so they segregate into 2 teams, the left side of the room going with one group and the right side of the room going with the other. So as they go through they get to the first door, I will introduce you to the roles, and you will help me figure out who is what and how to fix their particular challenge. So, been playing with the group for several years, and it's determined that it is his action by initiative, and he's not ready. He's confused. He's looking at the character sheet. Yes, we're definitely going to go into the room to the left, but is that the port or is that starboard? He's not really sure, and he's confused. He's flipping through his persona and says, why don't you come back to me? So Aaron's action is taken care of. We go to the action of Bob, and Bob says, okay, I am ready to enter, and as I do so, I want to cautiously approach the crates that you mentioned that are in this area. So as he approaches the crates, who should jump in but Evan? And Evan says, well, I've got picking a lock, so I'll go ahead and pick the lock. And when he does so, everybody's enthusiastically waiting for the locks to be picked. But wait a minute, says Charlie. Evan, you went to the right and we're going to the left, and this is the area that we're going into, so you can't help. You have to wait your turn. Evan says, oh, right, sorry. So we go ahead, and when Bob says that he wants to approach the lock, the mechanism, I describe how it looks, what kind of a mechanism it is, and grant him a die roll to open it. Well, as he rolls his dice about it, Charlie goes, "I'm charging the chest and I want to swing my axe at it." "Whoa," says Bob. I haven't even opened it yet. There's nothing dangerous. It's just a box. And Charlie's going, "I don't care. I want to see what happens. I want to chap at the box with my axe." So, okay, Charlie, you're going to have to just wait for a minute while this first gets resolved, because Bob's action's going on right now. So he's attempting the picking of the lock. As I start to do that, then now that Bob's doing it, Charlie's getting ready to quote swing with his axe, and who should pop up but Evan? And Evan says, "Hey, I've got a +2 with axes, so maybe I should be the one to swing the axe." "Evan, you're over there." As you can see, this is going to get chaotic as the players all have their issues. We're going to be talking about all of them, and I didn't hit nearly all of them, but let's go over the ones that I'm going to be dealing with, and we'll look at each one independently, look at what the conditions are that define them, and how they can be resolved, and how they can actually be avoided in many cases. So the first one we're going to talk about is the common thread, and that's Evan over here I've mentioned, and that's the action magnets. Alrighty. Wow. That was fun. Okay, so action magnets are players who simply have to be or want to be in every scene. They are generally unfamiliar with turn structure. That's one reason they might be action magnets. They are used to playing, for example, video games or some collaborative games where you all act all the time, and therefore there's no framework. They may not be familiar, therefore, with turn structure. They are generally or commonly they are new players, or at least inexperienced with role play games environments. They have a deep desire for attention and want to be part of the action at every possible opportunity. They also are really making sure that what they're doing is accepted by others, so they are desiring affirmation of not only what they're doing but why, and so therefore they often are quick to respond to questions, even if they are aware that they are not in the scene. Nonetheless, they tend to help speak up. The reason a person might be an action magnet can be manifold, but the reality of it is that they aren't understanding the concept of how role-play games work. That each person gives a description of what they're doing in reference to where they are, and then moves physically in story. Narratively, they move from position to position to do things. So if they want to open a chest, they have to go to where the chest is. And because of this disconnect, usually has to do with them not understanding the physics of the universe as well. And the reality is that an action magnet, if left unchecked, can actually drive other players from the game. If every time I try to do something, Johnny on the spot over there is getting to add his 2 cents, then I'm going to feel that he's being given special treatment. If I always have to wait until another person speaks over me to finish my scene, it makes that scene seem less important. And this really is a situation that they don't understand. They're not aware of what's going on in one scene, what's going on in another, and whatever. So they are just literally not up to speed. Now, when you are handling an action magnet, especially early on, it's important that you recognize that what is going on is the desire to be in all of the scenes. Not that they're trying to YOLO, not that they're trying to break the world. They just simply don't understand how the world works. And so being compassionate, speaking with them one-on-one, and clarifying the timeline can really help. Now, one of the things that really helps to mitigate and even actually can avoid this would be to have a really solid session zero where you talk about things like the setting, the stage, the scene, why initiative matters. So that session zero, while many people use that session zero specifically to grab the lore and make sure the players have the adequate lore to be involved in the story, it's also important to use it as a push me pull you when it comes to the rulings that go on during the game so that they will be equipped to understand what's going on session over session and scene versus scene so that they don't fall into the trap of the action magnet. I have had in every game set, in every games group that I've ever had, you have always at least one action magnet, and generally they're the youngster. They could be physically younger, could just be new to the game, but in either case, they're so excited about the world because it's in a role play environment. They're operating in their mental space. Some of them haven't done that since they were very young, or they still are there and haven't figured out where their boundaries are. So the protection against the action magnet really has everything to do with avoiding the opportunity for them to break a scene. If it happens, then you have to learn to equip it. In the case of this game, Evan needs to be drawn down to Evan. Gentlemen, you need to calm down. You need to move away from the visualization you're having and think in terms of what's going on in the scene. We are in by the way, for you, the port section of the ship, and therefore we are dealing with the actions of the group that are there. You are not in that group. So I'll get to you in a moment, and I promise you'll get as much limelight as everyone else, but in this scene, you've got to stay out of it because you're not there. This kind of direct conversation usually can shut down an action magnet in at least initially for a short period of time, but often it takes reinforcement to bring that action magnet into alignment with the group. Eventually, Evan will figure out that it's his turn when it's with his group, and will act accordingly. Action magnets actually generally become better over time if they are not catered to. So the game master really has to be established in terms of saying to the player, you are not in this part, and hold on. And without that, an action magnet can continue. I have some players who have been at role-playing tables for a decade, can't figure out why they've been having difficulties, and then they come to my table. We have a few episodes of their action magnet activities, and lo and behold, it resolves itself because we have the conversation that we're having now, and we're able to bring them back into the fold, so to speak. All right, let's talk about Charlie here. Charlie wanted to chop a chest in half with an axe right in the very first scene, and that's because he is a Leroy Jenkins. Now, I never played video games during the era that this phrase originally was used. The concept of the Leroy Jenkins, the idea of you only live once, or YOLO, were not a part of my roleplay experience. And I think, in all reality, it's the new player who hasn't had a framework of roleplay that is most likely or most prone to go the direction of Leroy Jenkins. Generally, Leroy Jenkins are players who see the story, are enthusiastic about the story, and jump hip deep into the story, but they're not doing so for the benefit of solving the story. Instead, they are trying to see how many traps they can trigger, how many monsters they can wake up, how much aggro they can draw, because they are unfamiliar with the mechanics. They are unfamiliar just as the action magnet, the Leroy Jenkins tends to be someone who just loses it when you give them the opportunity to act in the game, and therefore they tend to push the boundaries. Now, they do this not only to test the game system, which is generally a big part of it, but they are also doing it to test the patience of the storyteller and game master. In certain cases, it is intentional. They really want to test and see where the boundaries are, what their limits are, what you as a game master will do with them, how far you will let them go. But they really provide for themselves the quick version of what normally a player will resolve from weeks and weeks of play. A Leroy Jenkins can trigger many of them in a short period of time. Now, it completely demolishes the suspension of disbelief, because if you take any given situation, the reality of it is that people will act generally sensibly, and the Leroy Jenkins is not being sensible. There is most of them are gleefully aware of their ignorance of propriety. Others may be, perhaps not, but they really have to be handled quickly if you wish to preserve any story elements that were important. That is to say, running pell-mell across a space with an enemy in an ambush position does not do what the Leroy Jenkins purports to do. In other words, he thinks he's triggering all of the aggro so that everyone will take shots at him and everybody will miss because they're surprised. But if you come screaming Leroy Jenkins into a room from 3 hallways down, that's not going to happen. And most game masters are reticent about a player kill, a player resolution, even if it would preserve the integrity of the adventure. The challenge of a PC in a games environment is that since the game master really wants players to play, he's not wanting to, put them down even when they are insane like this. And so now the way you can prevent a Leroy Jenkins is difficult to assess. Generally, a session 0 can completely avoid the YOLO if the players get your expression that this is a serious campaign, that we are actually treating it like reality. Because most people who are brand new players, or even some veteran players, don't get that the fantasy setting can be an archetype of the real world. The concept of a serious story is alien to them. So session 0 really gives you a way to directly face that. Now, there are ways to mitigate a YOLO. In other words, perhaps the distance between point A and point B that they perceive to be, close enough to trigger something, maybe it's not. So there are ways to mitigate the situation by explaining the environmental conditions of the phenomena of the situation so that they are not being held to the line. And generally, if your group is prone to the YOLO, it's often able to be repaired if the players accept a retcon, that you can just simply say, well, that couldn't have happened because of A, B, and C, and so we're going to act as if it didn't happen and bring the scene back and rewind. But the reality is that a Leroy Jenkins he's not a game breaker, because he's simply trying to experience the world so that he understands what the framework is. But it's far better hand to describing the situation with David. But David, a person who falls into this pauper orphan category, generally comes to the table perfectly prepared to play, has everything, but he's assessed his inventory and feels that he's been deprived. Now, generally, these are veteran players with years of experience, and they are aware that advancement in the game generally takes two different levels. And the one level, you have to gain the experience by destroying the monsters and such, and then you have to have the money. The characters have to have gained the cash, the advances, the treasures in game in order to finance their operation. And a pauper orphan is someone who is saying, gosh, I've been playing X long, but I don't have enough stuff. I never have enough cash. I never have enough magic items. I never have enough access to spells. I never have enough new material. And this concept of the pauper orphan really has to do with the play style with which that player is familiar. In many role-play game systems, going back through Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and others, there is such a degree of detail written into the mechanics of the game that the players are right in that they need to be concerned with these numbers, but their need to focus on that means that their focus and their attention is on their character sheet, not on the story and the persons and the people they're working with. So therefore they are operating under this false precept that the piece of paper matters to a role-play game. And I know the key here, though, is that a person who has this challenge, a person who is a pauper orphan, is focusing upon what they don't have, and they are dependent upon that advancement on a constant basis. And if they do not perceive that they are being advanced, then they automatically go on the defensive for their position. In a way, that way the game master becomes aware of their plight. Now, the real mechanism that's a challenge is the fact that economies in roleplay games are inadequate to represent what really would go on in the situation if it were the real world, so to speak. In other words, if I have an item and it has a trade value, it only has a trade value if the person that I'm trading with desires the item, and it only works as a lever if I'm willing to release it in trade for the adequate amount of material from the other person. And not having a fair or equitable trade mechanism means that a player cannot judge the value of those things they have unless they are empirically valuable. And that's why a game master constantly has to make sure that the treasures he provides gives the players adequate room to make those negotiations. Now, obligatory payoffs. In other words, those situations where a game master simply provides extra loot in an adventure to try to mitigate what the orphan has said, generally is only a partial patch. It doesn't fix the situation over time, and in a couple of weeks they'll be back at the same trough, because that they've now gotten awareness that when they complain indirectly, they get rewarded. So therefore, you've actually put a situation in that makes it difficult. Now, you can mitigate their distress by having a discussion over economies, but one of what I have found is that there is a solution. If you utilize the concept of a group loot pile, and the players are amassing this fortune collectively, then no one is ever, quote, broke. No one's ever without, because the loot pile can be less specifically generated, less specifically guided, so that the players don't feel like they are accountable for every nickel and dime that they spend in the story. So therefore, their need to look at the character sheet for whether they've got enough cash to do a situation or whatever becomes less important, because certainly if I don't have it, at least we as a group, I know we have it, because we defeated a dragon last week and there's 40,000 gold, so there should be plenty of loot to pay our bills, so therefore I don't have to worry about the micromanagement any longer. Now, the benefit of a system like the Nycos mechanism in this case is that the economy situation is washed out. It's really just a matter of trade, and really in the hands of the game master and the players. Furthermore, since character advancement doesn't have anything to do with what the game master submits to the story, means that the players can get exactly what they want from the collective without having to go to. Now, this one's a little problematic. I'll give a related story. When I was a younger person, I was game mastering for a group in Reseda, California, and I was approached by a new player who was let's just say he was a religious leader for a local community, and he was wanting to be involved in role playing, and of course I'm willing to GM for whoever shows up, and so almost immediately he specified that he wanted to play his character as a sadist, and he wanted character to get involved with the concepts of bondage and discipline within his character's role, at which time I just shook my head and said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I can't game master for that, because that dark fantasy doesn't suit any of the storylines that I prefer to run, and I'm not going to allow your persona, just your character, by the way. It was not that he was wanting to change the campaign. He simply wanted to have this as his own little peccadillo that he could pursue in the downtime. And it's like, no, I can't do that. The person who comes to the game with dark fantasies and bad things in their head are not coming to roleplay, in my estimation, for the proper reasons. They're looking for an outlet for an emotional state that I can't support. So in my case, fortunately, it was only at the cringe factor. It wasn't like he was wanting to pursue these with the player characters, but nonetheless, it was impossible for me to do story development with players at the table. When we came to his action, it was always in this dark vein. So just realize that some people, when they come to the game, they are coming for wish fulfillment. They're looking for a fictional location where they can pursue these unsavory, arguably unpolitic conditions. They want to see where that will go, so that they can feed their personal desires list. And the challenge with it is it requires the game master to be complicit. The game master has to be part of that story, and it's difficult. It's also counterintuitive if you're building an adventure that's got good guys defeating bad guys. The very concept of this darker angle is counterintuitive and in most cases unproductive. It isn't going to help advance the storyline. Now, it also requires a narrower focus for that persona, and in gathering that narrower focus, it restricts their agency to do things. If you're going to be pursuing that, you're not pursuing other virtues, and so it makes it difficult. Now, player intervention can mitigate. In other words, if the other players say, calm it down, or we are going to walk, is fine, but it really depends upon what I consider to be the session zero. If you want to completely avoid the situation, have in your session zero conversations that include what do you want from the game and what do you expect from the game, and therefore be able to weed out these darker elements. It's not that a player can't have that position. It's fine if they want to, in their own mind, pursue it. But to require the game master to feed into that is actually antithetical to role play in general, and you have to actually have that conversation with the player. Now, I know this may be a controversial topic, and if so, please leave me in your comments in the comment section what you think about this particular element and how you would handle it otherwise. Okay, if you have a guy who's got a fancy sword and every time an action comes up he wants to swing his fancy sword, you found yourself an unimaginative one-trick pony. It doesn't mean that he's not imaginative, it just simply means that he's not utilizing it because he likes this one thing. Usually it's by casual or occasional players who they think they have to do signature moves in order to be part of the game. They think that that is part of it. They may actually have been a YOLO at some point, and this particular action got them a laugh, got them some advantage, maybe even defeated the monster. So they hold on to it. But by definition, this is insanity. When you continue to do the same thing expecting different results each time, that's insane. Now, these players tend to be surprisingly attentive to the story because they're wanting to hear what's going on, but they also haven't considered what other things they might do, and so they're usually unaware of the fact that they are a one-trick pony. They don't realize that, there are other ways to handle situations. So by encouraging them to try other things, encouraging them to take other actions, really helps to ameliorate that problem over the time. And usually the one-trick pony will eventually expand into multiple options and become more tenable as a player because it wears out over time when it gets to themselves to be a little mundane. So one-trick pony is probably one of the easiest of these problem children to deal with. Finally, in the case of Aaron over here, we have the analytic paralytic. The idea is, again, let me say it again, the time-consuming analytic paralytic. This is a person who, when it comes to their time to make a decision, they literally can't make one. They've got too many options in their head. They've got too many alternatives. Now, these are usually veteran players because generally a new player, if they don't know what they want to do, they just do something. That's just the mechanic of it. But a veteran player knows that if he makes the wrong move, things could go badly, and so therefore doesn't want to make a wrong move, and therefore he vacillates about what he wants to do. Now, they can be new to their character. Maybe they're new to their skills list. Maybe they're new to their spells list, and therefore they are truly at a loss of what to do. But most have an idea of what to do. It's just that there are so many options, they're not sure which one. And that's truly what analysis paralysis is. You've just got so many potential decisions to make, you can't figure out which ones. Now, it's difficult to directly confront a person who is an analytic paralytic because if you cater to them and let them, wait to make a decision, then you're burning time that other players could be acting, and therefore you're giving the false perception that you're giving them the benefit of extra time, even though they haven't used any of it because they're sitting and doing nothing. But it's difficult to draw them out and point to it. Furthermore, if it's a group encouragement, can actually make it worse because the player then, it depends on the player, the rest of the group, to decide to act, and then they tell him what to do, and therefore you're now burning the midnight oil just to make sure that the player makes a decision, and that's also not good. But what does work, what you can do, is have an individual conversation with the player away from the game and talk about possible options, maybe set up some subroutine concepts so that if they don't know what to do, then they default to this action. If they default, they give them the opportunity to build out a battle plan so that when it comes to their turn, they can just act more quickly. It really comes down to affirmation or encouragement of them at the moment when they do act quickly, because this is reinforcement that leads them to naturally. Alrighty, so we have now formally covered all of the problem children, and so now I'm going to recap, and this actually might be the piece of this video that actually goes online, because I don't have to go through all of this to get through the message. I'm Jonathan Albin, and I'm the Game Master for take two. If your games groups have difficulties, here are 6 possible reasons why. First of all, you may have players who are action magnets, which means that they involve themselves in every action, in every scene, even if they physically couldn't be there. This is a recoverable situation when you actually address it and demonstrate that they are going to get their own fair share and their own time, but that they have to focus on what they are doing and not what the rest is doing. Perhaps you have a Leroy Jenkins and they go running, screaming into the adventure all the time, breaking the story and interfering with the flow of the adventure as you intended. The way you avoid or mitigate a Leroy Jenkins is simply to talk about the realism of that, and if they are indeed only wanting to understand the physics, take time to explain it to them in a session 0, thereby limiting the number of times they lose their mind and go running, screaming into the adventure. Perhaps you have players that are looking for payouts constantly because they are concerned that they are not advancing quickly enough. They have this concept that they are somehow an orphaned and a pauper and never have enough money, never have enough treasure, never have enough of anything. And again, having a ongoing campaign really does support the idea of a group treasure location, so that the concept of costs, it falls off of their plate, so that they can actually dedicate themselves to advancing the persona instead of trying to see how much stuff they can acquire. Next are the dark fantasists, who bring to the game perhaps a blue note, and it's simply easiest to deal with them during your session 0, which makes the session 0s absolutely critical. You really have to mitigate the dark fantasies by role-playing, soft-playing their take on it, and there's we've talked about more of that in the episode, so watch the entire episode at twitch.tv/NycosRPG. And next are perhaps you have unimaginative one-trick ponies. Every time they play, all they do is hit it with a rock. That's okay. That's a way to play, but to advance your players, improve your players' action, and give them the benefit that is due them, perhaps integrating conversation and encouraging them to try other things will improve the play environment. And then finally, you may have analytic paralytics. They simply can't make decisions. It is best to work one-on-one with them, to consider other options, and to in-game reward them when they make those faster, more prompt decisions, because it really helps the game overall. All right, this is Jonathan Albin. This has been NycosRPG. Today's broadcast is in the can, and we will see you next time. Don't forget, we are on air Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. and 11 p.m. We record on Twitch, and then we broadcast up to YouTube. So if you have any comments or questions, please leave those in the YouTube comment section, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you for your support, and we'll talk to you soon.